The building does not exist on any official map, no sign on the gate, no name on the directory, no address in any government database that a foreign journalist could legally access. From the outside, it looks like a nondescript campus of low-rise office buildings on the northern edge of Tel Aviv, the kind of anonymous glass and concrete architecture that blends into the sprawl of any modern city. Security cameras, manicured hedges, a parking lot full of ordinary cars. But every intelligence agency on Earth knows what it is. The Mossad headquarters, officially referred to only as the campus, is the nerve center of Israel's global intelligence empire. It is the place where operations are conceived that topple governments, assassinate nuclear scientists, and sabotage missile programs across 5 continents. It is the place where the targeting data for Israeli airstrikes is processed and verified. It is the place where the most sensitive human intelligence networks in the Middle East are managed, updated, and protected. And on this particular morning, in a scenario that Pentagon planners have quietly war-gamed for years but publicly refused to acknowledge a single Iranian ballistic missile, the Zolfaghar is in the air. It was launched 11 minutes ago from a mobile transporter erector launcher concealed in the Zagros Mountains over 1,100 kilometers to the east. It is traveling at over Mach 5. Its circular error probable, the radius within which it is statistically guaranteed to land, is less than 10 meters, and it is aimed directly at the center of that campus. Israel's Arrow, 3 system attempts an intercept. It fails. The David Sling battery tracking the incoming warhead loses the lock in the terminal phase, a phenomenon Iranian engineers specifically engineered into the Zolfaghar's guidance package. The warhead impacts, the campus ceases to exist. What happens in the next 72 hours will reshape the Middle East, rattle the foundations of the Western Intelligence Alliance, and send the United States government into a level of institutional panic not seen since the morning of the 11th of September 2001. Welcome to the Zhang Report. I am Professor Zhang Shuiqin, and today we are going to examine in precise technical and strategic detail how Iran's Zolfaghar ballistic missile, a weapon the Western press has consistently underestimated, could erase the most important intelligence headquarters in the Middle East, and what that single strike would mean for the entire architecture of American and Israeli power in the region. In this video, we will cover 4 major areas. First, the Zolfaghar missile itself, its technical specifications, its guidance architecture, its penetration capabilities, and exactly why its 10-meter circular error probable makes it categorically different from the missiles that came before it. This is not a weapon that aims at a city. It aims at a room inside a building. That distinction matters enormously. Second, the target. We will examine what the Mossad headquarters actually represents in the context of Israeli and American intelligence operations. This is not just about destroying a building. This is about destroying a network, a human intelligence infrastructure that took decades to build, that underpins every major covert operation Israel runs from Morocco to Pakistan, and that the United States depends on more than it has ever publicly admitted. Third, the immediate military and intelligence consequences. What happens when that network goes dark? How does Israel operate without its primary intelligence processing center? What happens to ongoing operations, to agents in the field, to surveillance programs, to the real-time threat assessment pipelines that feed directly into Israeli Air Force targeting systems? And fourth, the American panic response. We will examine why Washington, not Tel Aviv, may actually be the more destabilized party in the immediate aftermath of such a strike. The depth of CIA-Mossad integration is something that receives almost no serious analysis in Western media. When Mossad bleeds, the CIA bleeds with it. And when both bleed simultaneously, the strategic consequences are global. Stay with me for the full analysis. This is going to be a deep one. Before we go further, if you are new to the Zhang Report, I want to take 30 seconds to explain what we do here. This channel exists because mainstream Western media coverage of Middle Eastern military conflict is, with very few exceptions, analytically shallow. It covers events. It does not explain systems. It tells you what happened. It almost never explains why it was possible or what the second and third order consequences will be. We do the opposite. We go deep into the technical specifications of the weapons. We examine the doctrine behind the operations. We trace the strategic logic from the battlefield all the way up to the geopolitical level. And we do it without the institutional biases that constrain analysis at most Western think tanks and news organizations. If that approach resonates with you, subscribe, hit the bell, leave a comment with your analysis. The conversation in this community is one of the most substantive on YouTube, and your perspective matters to it. Now let us begin. To understand the significance of a Zolfaghar strike on Mossad headquarters, you first need to understand what kind of military event we are actually talking about. This is not a missile attack in the conventional sense, the kind of mass salvo strike that Iran has practiced against broad area targets. This is a single weapon, single target precision decapitation strike. And in the history of modern warfare, that category of operation has almost exclusively belonged to the United States. Think about what American precision strike capability has meant for the last 30 years of warfare. The ability to put a weapon through a specific window of a specific building at a specific time from hundreds of kilometers away, that capability has defined American military dominance since the Gulf War. It is the capability that allows a superpower to conduct warfare with surgical precision, to eliminate command structures without leveling cities, to send a political message encoded in the geometry of destruction. Iran, for most of its post-revolutionary military history, did not have that capability. Its missiles were powerful, but imprecise. The Shahab series, the workhorses of the Iranian ballistic missile arsenal through the 1990s and 2000s, had circular error probables measured in hundreds of meters. A weapon with a 300-meter CEP can destroy a neighborhood. It cannot destroy a specific building within that neighborhood. It certainly cannot destroy a specific section of a specific building. The Zolfaghar changed that calculation. Developed by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Aerospace Force and publicly unveiled in 2016, the Zolfaghar represented a generational leap in Iranian precision strike capability. But the versions that have been developed and refined since that initial unveiling, the iterations that have incorporated lessons learned from operational use in Syria, from reverse engineering of captured American drone guidance packages, and from the deep technical cooperation between Iran and North Korea on inertial navigation systems, those versions are categorically more capable than what was shown to the world in that first public display. Iranian military doctrine, as it has evolved over the past decade, identifies three categories of high-value fixed targets that Zolfaghar-class precision weapons are specifically designed to engage. The first category is air defense infrastructure, radar installations, missile battery command nodes, communications, relay stations. The second category is airbase hardened infrastructure control towers, fuel storage, hardened aircraft shelters. And the third category, the one that is most rarely discussed in Western analysis, is what Iranian doctrine calls intelligence and command decision nodes, headquarters facilities, command centers, the physical locations where the human beings who direct military and intelligence operations actually sit and work. Mossad headquarters falls squarely in that third category. Now let us think through the operational scenario. A Zolfaghar launch from the Zagros mountain range gives the missile a flight path that keeps it over Iranian territory for the majority of its journey, only entering Israeli-monitored airspace in the final minutes of flight. The launch platform, a mobile TEL, a transporter erector launcher, can be moved into position, conduct the launch, and begin repositioning within 8 to 10 minutes. By the time Israeli or American satellite assets have processed the thermal signature of the launch and vectored intercept assets toward the missile, it is already in its terminal phase. The terminal phase is where the Zolfaghar's guidance architecture becomes decisive. Iranian engineers have incorporated a multi-mode terminal guidance package that combines inertial navigation, highly resistant to jamming, with a scene-matching algorithm that uses preloaded electro-optical imagery the target to make real-time course corrections in the final kilometers of flight. This is the same basic principle behind American JDAM guidance packages and the Russian Iskander terminal guidance system. Iran developed its own version through a combination of indigenous research and technology transfer from partners who shall not be named in polite company. The result is a weapon that, at the moment of impact, is not following a ballistic trajectory. It is actively steering toward a specific point on a specific structure, and that point can be pre-programmed to within 10 meters of the intended detonation location. 10 meters. In practical terms, that means if you want to hit the primary server infrastructure of the Mossad headquarters, you can program the weapon to impact the specific wing of the building where that infrastructure is housed. If you want to hit the operations center, the room where real-time intelligence is processed and disseminated, you can program for that specific location. The Israelis know this. The Americans know this, and both have been quietly adjusting their assessments of Iranian precision strike capability upward for the past several years, even as their public statements have continued to emphasize Iranian limitations. The defensive picture is equally sobering. Arrow 3. Israel's uppermost layer of ballistic missile defense is designed to intercept threats in the exo-atmospheric phase outside the atmosphere before the warhead begins its terminal descent. It is effective against large, relatively predictable ballistic trajectories. It is significantly less effective against missiles that conduct terminal maneuvering missiles that change their flight path in the final moments before impact. The Zolfaghar's terminal maneuvering capability derived from the same MARV technology that has been incorporated into the FATA series, though at a lower level of sophistication, introduces exactly the kind of unpredictability that degrades Arrow 3's intercept probability. Israeli defense officials have acknowledged in background briefings that terminal maneuvering threats represent the most challenging class of targets for their existing defense architecture. David's Sling, the middle-tier system, faces a similar challenge in the terminal phase, compounded by the time compression that comes with a high-speed ballistic trajectory. The intercept window for a Mach 5 plus terminal approach is measured in seconds. The result, a realistic intercept probability against a well-executed Zolfaghar precision strike under operational conditions rather than ideal testing conditions, is substantially lower than the official figures that Israel's defense establishment presents publicly. The missile gets through. The campus is struck. Let us spend serious time with the Zolfaghar, because this weapon has been systematically underestimated in Western defense analysis, and that underestimation is itself a strategic liability for the countries that depend on accurate threat assessment to design their defenses. The Zolfaghar is a single-stage, solid-fueled ballistic missile developed by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Aerospace Force. It was first publicly unveiled in September 2016 when Iranian state television broadcast footage of the missile being launched from a mobile transporter erector launcher during a military exercise. Western analysts at the time focused primarily on its reported range, approximately 700 kilometers in the baseline configuration, and assessed it as a theater-level weapon with limited strategic significance. That assessment was wrong then. It is catastrophically wrong now. The extended range variant, designated Zolfaghar B in some Western intelligence assessments, though Iran has not formally adopted that designation, publicly extends the operational range to between 1000 and 1200 kilometers. That range figure is not a marginal improvement, it is a transformational one. At 1200 kilometers, a Zolfaghar launched from hardened positions deep inside the Zagros mountain range, positions that are themselves difficult to target with Israeli airstrikes, can reach every significant strategic target inside Israel. Tel Aviv, Haifa, Nevatim Air Base, the Dimona nuclear facility, and yes, the Mossad campus on the northern edge of the Tel Aviv metropolitan area. The solid fuel propulsion system deserves particular emphasis because it is one of the most operationally significant characteristics of the entire weapon. Liquid-fueled ballistic missiles, the earlier generation of Iranian systems, including the Shahab series, require a fueling process that can take anywhere from 30 minutes to several hours depending on the system. That fueling process produces a distinct thermal signature detectable by American and Israeli overhead reconnaissance satellites. It requires the missile to remain stationary and exposed during the most vulnerable phase of its pre-launch preparation. It gives the adversary a warning window, a period in which an intercept, a preemptive strike, or at minimum, a defensive alert can be initiated. Solid-fueled missiles eliminate that window entirely. A Zolfaghar on a mobile TEL is stored in a ready-to-launch state. The launcher moves, it positions itself, it erects the missile, it fires. The entire sequence from transport configuration to ignition can be completed in under 10 minutes. By the time a surveillance satellite passes overhead and the thermal signature of the launch has been processed by ground stations, the missile is already at altitude and the TEL is repositioning to its next concealed location. The launch platform itself becomes nearly impossible to destroy in the critical post-launch window. This operational characteristic, rapid launch, immediate dispersal, minimal pre-launch signature, is what makes the mobile solid-fueled ballistic missile the most difficult class of weapon to suppress in any conflict scenario. The United States learned this lesson painfully during the Gulf War, when coalition forces flew thousands of sorties attempting to hunt mobile Scud launchers in Iraq, and destroyed by the most generous post-war assessment, a handful of actual launch vehicles. Iranian engineers studied that campaign extensively. The lessons they drew from it are embedded in the operational doctrine governing how Zolfaghar tells are positioned, concealed, and employed. Now we turn to the characteristic that makes the Zolfaghar not merely a powerful weapon, but a genuinely revolutionary one: its terminal guidance architecture and the 10-meter circular error probable that architecture produces. To appreciate what 10 meters means in practical military terms, consider the historical baseline. The Shahab-3, which formed the backbone of Iran's ballistic missile arsenal through the early 2000s, had a circular error probable of approximately 190 meters in its baseline configuration, and that was considered an improvement over its predecessors. A weapon with a 190-meter CEP is a city killer. You aim it at an urban area, and you accept that it will land somewhere within a roughly 400-meter diameter circle centered on your aim point. That is sufficient for terrorizing civilian populations or destroying large industrial complexes. It is completely insufficient for targeting a specific building, let alone a specific section of a specific building. The progression from 190 meters to 10 meters, a 19-fold improvement in precision, did not happen by accident, and it did not happen quickly. It was the product of sustained investment, reverse engineering, technology acquisition through sanctions evasion networks, and direct technical cooperation with partners who possess relevant expertise. The specific technologies that enabled this leap include advances in microelectromechanical systems, gyroscopes for the inertial navigation package, sophisticated anti-jamming receivers for GPS and GLONASS signal processing, and the scene-matching terminal guidance algorithm that provides the final course correction in the last phase of flight. That scene-matching system warrants detailed examination. In the terminal phase of flight, beginning at roughly 20 to 30 kilometers altitude, as the missile descends toward its target, the weapon's onboard imaging sensor begins capturing real-time electro-optical imagery of the terrain below. Stored in the missile's onboard computer is a reference image of the target, derived from satellite reconnaissance photography or high-resolution drone imagery collected during pre-mission intelligence preparation. The guidance computer continuously compares the sensor's live image with the stored reference image, calculates the geometric offset between the missile's predicted impact point and the actual location of the target feature it is tracking, and commands the control surfaces to make the necessary trajectory corrections. This process repeats multiple times per second throughout the terminal phase. The result is that the missile is not following a pre-programmed ballistic arc in its final moments. It is actively navigating toward a specific visual feature of the target. That feature can be a rooftop antenna array, it can be a specific entrance to a specific building, it can be a ventilation shaft above an underground server room. The 10-meter CEP means that wherever the guidance engineer designates as the aim point during mission planning, the warhead will impact within a 10-meter radius of that point with statistical reliability. The warhead options configured for Zolfaghar precision strikes against hardened facilities include a bunker-penetrating variant, a dense, aerodynamically shaped penetrator designed to punch through multiple meters of reinforced concrete before the main explosive charge detonates. This is the relevant configuration for any target that includes significant underground components, which the Mossad campus certainly does. Israeli strategic facilities universally incorporate hardened underground spaces for exactly the scenarios that precision ballistic missiles are designed to exploit. The assumption being that a missile accurate enough to threaten a surface structure cannot follow its target underground. The penetrating warhead defeats that assumption. Aimed at the precise location of a ventilation shaft, a stairwell entrance, or a structural weak point identified through detailed reconnaissance, a penetrating warhead can deliver its explosive effect to the underground levels of a facility that its external hardening was designed to protect. The combination of these characteristics, solid fuel rapid launch mobile platform 1200 kilometer range, 10-meter terminal precision penetrating warhead option, and anti-jamming guidance redundancy produces a weapon that occupies a capability tier that simply did not exist in Iran's arsenal a decade ago. It is a weapon that can be assigned a specific room in a specific building as its target launched from a concealed mobile platform with minimal pre-launch warning. and expected to impact within 10 meters of that room with a statistical reliability that military planners can build operational doctrine around. That is not a tactical improvement, that is a strategic transformation, and any analysis of Iranian military capability that fails to account for it is not analysis, it is wishful thinking dressed in technical language. The American response to a successful Zolfaghar strike on Mossad headquarters would unfold in several distinct phases, each driven by a different set of institutional imperatives and each characterized by a different kind of panic. The first phase, the immediate hours after the strike, would be dominated by what intelligence professionals call damage assessment paralysis. This is the period in which no one in the system has a clear enough picture of what has actually been destroyed to make confident recommendations about what to do next. The problem is particularly acute in this scenario because the CIA's primary source of processed intelligence on Iranian activities and Middle Eastern threat networks is Mossad itself. The relationship between the two agencies is not merely a matter of diplomatic courtesy, it is a deeply integrated operational partnership in which Israeli collection capabilities, Israeli human intelligence networks, and Israeli analytic expertise flow directly into American intelligence products. When Mossad's processing capacity goes dark, the CIA does not simply lose an ally, it loses a substantial portion of its own effective intelligence capability in the region. The second phase, beginning roughly 12 to 24 hours after the strike, would involve the activation of American military contingency planning. U.S. Central Command would immediately begin positioning additional naval assets. A second carrier strike group would be ordered to the region. B. 2 stealth bombers at Diego Garcia would be placed on alert. The message being sent to Tehran would be one of imminent military response. But here is where the American panic becomes strategically interesting, because the contingency response immediately runs into a fundamental problem. The intelligence basis for selecting Iranian targets has been significantly degraded by the same event that is driving the demand for retaliation. The CIA's target packages for Iran, the pre-planned strike options that exist for exactly this kind of escalation scenario, depend heavily on intelligence that was being processed and updated through Mossad channels. With those channels disrupted, the reliability of existing target packages becomes uncertain. Striking based on degraded intelligence introduces the risk of hitting the wrong targets, civilian infrastructure, third country assets, locations that have been relocated since the last good intelligence update. The military wants to strike. The intelligence community is warning that the conditions for a confident strike do not exist. The political leadership is receiving escalatory pressure from every direction simultaneously. This is the anatomy of institutional panic at the highest level of American government. The third phase involves the international dimension. A successful Iranian strike on Mossad headquarters would produce a wave of signals intelligence from diplomatic channels around the world. Every government with any stake in Middle Eastern stability would be communicating urgently with every other government. The content of those communications would reveal something that American officials have long suspected but not wished to confront directly. The depth of international sympathy for Iranian resistance to Israeli and American pressure, even among governments that publicly align with Washington. European partners would urge restraint. Gulf Arab states, quietly relieved at the demonstration of Iranian capability, would make public statements of condemnation while privately signaling their unavailability for basing rights for American retaliatory strikes. Russia and China would issue statements calling for de-escalation while simultaneously moving to exploit the strategic opportunity created by American distraction. The global diplomatic environment would not support the kind of coalition that the United States would need to conduct a sustained military campaign against Iran, and Washington would know it. The result of these three phases, damage assessment, paralysis, degraded military targeting, and adverse diplomatic environment, would be a United States that is simultaneously enraged, humiliated, and strategically constrained. That combination is the definition of institutional panic, and it is precisely the strategic outcome that Iranian planners have spent years designing their precision strike doctrine to produce. There is a dimension of this scenario that purely technical and strategic analysis tends to underweight, and that is the human dimension, the question of will of institutional resilience, and of what it means for an intelligence organization. To absorb a blow of this magnitude, Mossad is not just a building, it is a culture. It is a way of thinking about intelligence, about risk, about the relationship between the state and its secret servants that has been built over 7 decades of continuous operation in one of the most dangerous strategic environments, Earth. The people who work in that building are not interchangeable government employees. They are specialists, analysts, case officers, technical experts whose individual knowledge and judgment cannot be replicated by simply hiring replacements. A strike that kills a significant portion of Mossad's senior operational staff does not set the organization back by the number of weeks or months it would take to rebuild the physical campus. It sets the organization back by the years, potentially decades, it would take to rebuild the accumulated human expertise that was destroyed alongside the building. This is the distinction between destroying an organization's infrastructure and destroying an organization's institutional memory. Infrastructure can be rebuilt. Institutional memory cannot. For the individuals who survive such a strike, the case officers who are out of the building at the moment of impact, the analysts who are on travel, the technical staff who are working at secondary locations, the psychological impact would be profound and lasting. Mossad's operational effectiveness depends on its personnel believing in the invulnerability of their core institutions. That belief is what enables them to take risks, to commit to long-term operations, to trust the organizational structures that support their work. When the campus is gone, that belief is gone with it, and the operational caution that replaces it, the institutional PTSD that follows any catastrophic organizational loss, is itself a form of strategic degradation that does not show up in any capability assessment but is entirely real in its effects. On the Iranian side, the psychological dynamic is precisely the reverse. The successful execution of a precision strike against the most symbolically significant intelligence target in the Middle East, a strike that defeated Israeli missile defense, that achieved its stated objective, that demonstrated a capability the West had publicly dismissed. That success would represent an enormous validation of the strategic and technical investments Iran has made over decades of sanctions, isolation, and military pressure. It would confirm for the Iranian military establishment that the doctrine of precision deterrence, the idea that Iran can impose unacceptable costs on its adversaries without the need for nuclear weapons or mass casualty attacks, operationally viable. That confirmation would accelerate investment in the precision strike program. It would encourage the development of additional high-value target packages. It would shift the internal debate within the Iranian security establishment toward those who have always argued that Iran's conventional military capability is sufficient to deter and, if necessary, defeat American and Israeli pressure. The will and spirit factor, in other words, does not favor the defender in this scenario. It favors the attacker. And that asymmetry in morale and institutional confidence is as strategically significant as any of the technical or tactical factors we have examined. Step back from the immediate crisis and look at what a successful Zolfaghar strike on Mossad headquarters would mean for the global strategic order. The most significant long-term consequence would be the destruction of a foundational assumption that has underpinned Western strategic planning for 30 years. The assumption of intelligence superiority. American and Israeli strategic confidence has rested in significant part on the belief that the intelligence available to decision makers in Washington and Tel Aviv is so much better than the intelligence available to their adversaries that it produces a decisive strategic advantage. The Americans know what the Iranians are planning before the Iranians execute it. The Israelis can track every significant development in Iranian military programs in near real time. This asymmetric intelligence advantage compensates in strategic planning for a range of other disadvantages: geographic, demographic, political. A successful strike on Mossad headquarters preceded necessarily by successful Iranian intelligence collection that identified the target location, characterized its layout, and provided the scene-matching imagery for the Zolfaghar's terminal guidance system would demonstrate that the intelligence advantage is not as absolute as Western planners have assumed. Iran collected the intelligence it needed to conduct this strike. It processed that intelligence without detection. It translated that intelligence into a precision weapon capability that defeated Israeli missile defense. That demonstration would reverberate through every adversary of the United States and Israel that has been operating under the assumption of American intelligence dominance. Every state actor that has been deterred in part by the belief that American intelligence can see and preempt its military planning would be forced to revise that assessment. The second global consequence would be the acceleration of precision strike proliferation. Iran's demonstrated success would create intense demand among a range of state and non-state actors for the technical capabilities that made it possible. The terminal guidance systems, the scene matching algorithms, the anti-jamming GPS receivers. Iran would be under significant pressure from its partners and proxies to share these technologies. Some of that sharing would be deliberate policy. Some would happen through the inevitably porous channels of international arms commerce. Within 5 years of such a demonstration, the precision strike capability that is currently concentrated in the hands of a small number of state actors would be distributed significantly more broadly. The barrier to conducting decapitation strikes against hardened intelligence and military targets, a barrier that has provided significant strategic stability, would be lower than at any previous point in the modern era. The third global consequence would be the reorientation of alliance relationships in the Middle East. The Gulf Arab states, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait have spent the past decade carefully balancing their relationships with the United States and Iran, tilting toward Washington when American power appears dominant and quietly accommodating Tehran when Iranian capability asserts itself. A successful Zolfaghar strike on Mossad would decisively shift that balance calculation. The message to every Gulf capital would be clear. American and Israeli protective guarantees do not extend to the most sensitive and symbolically important targets in the region. If Iran can erase Mossad headquarters, it can certainly reach any target in the Gulf. The resulting acceleration of Gulf accommodation with Iran already underway following the Chinese-brokered Saudi-Iranian normalization agreement would fundamentally alter the political geography of the region. American military presence in the Gulf, which depends on host nation cooperation, would become increasingly untenable. The infrastructure of American power projection into the Middle East would begin to contract, and that contraction would have consequences that extend far beyond the Middle East, consequences for American credibility in East Asia and Eastern Europe, in every theater where American allies are calculating whether Washington's security guarantees are worth the risks of maintaining them. A single missile strike, 10 meters of circular error probable. The ripple effects extend to the entire architecture of American global power. Let me bring this analysis to a close. What we have examined today is not a fantasy scenario. It is not science fiction. Every element of this analysis, the technical capabilities of the Zolfaghar, the vulnerabilities of Israeli missile defense against maneuvering terminal threats, the deep integration between CIA and Mossad operations, the strategic consequences of intelligence, infrastructure destruction, every element is grounded in open-source technical reporting, in the public statements of military and intelligence officials, and in the documented history of how precision strike weapons have transformed military conflict over the past 3 decades. The Zolfaghar is a real weapon. Its 10-meter CEP is a real capability. The Mossad campus is a real target that sits at a fixed location in a city that Iranian missile systems can reach. The vulnerabilities in Israeli missile defense against maneuvering threats are real vulnerabilities that Israeli defense officials have acknowledged in background briefings. What I have done in this video is trace the logical consequences of combining those real elements into a coherent operational scenario and examine what those consequences mean at the tactical, operational, strategic, and global levels. The conclusion of that analysis is not comfortable for anyone who has invested confidence in the existing architecture of American and Israeli deterrence in the Middle East. Iran has developed a precision strike capability that is qualitatively different from the area saturation missile programs it operated a decade ago. The Zolfaghar and the broader family of precision-guided ballistic missiles of which it is the most mature member represents an Iranian ability to conduct the kind of surgical, high-value decapitation strikes that have previously been the exclusive domain of the most technologically advanced military powers on Earth. That capability does not make Iran invincible. It does not mean that a strike on Mossad headquarters would go unanswered, or that the consequences of such a strike would be favorable to Iran across every dimension of the subsequent conflict. The American and Israeli response would be massive, and it would impose severe costs on Iran. But the fact that Iran can impose those kinds of costs on its adversaries before absorbing the response, the fact that the exchange would be genuinely bilateral rather than unilaterally punitive, fundamentally changes the strategic calculus. It is the difference between a deterrence relationship in which one party can strike with impunity and one in which both parties face genuine costs from escalation. That is the world we are now in. And understanding it clearly, without the institutional biases and political pressures that distort analysis in Washington and Tel Aviv, is the first step toward navigating it wisely. This is the Jiang Report. I am Professor Jiang Shuiqin. If this analysis added value to your understanding of the strategic situation in the Middle East, please subscribe, hit the bell notification, and share this video with anyone who is trying to make sense of what is happening in this region. Leave your analysis in the comments. I read them, and the conversation this community generates is consistently one of the most substantive on this platform. We will be back with more deep analysis. Until then, think clearly, question assumptions, and never mistake confidence for competence.